Think about it, can a video game be non-fiction? Hi, I'm Dylan, and despite being the 9th most profitable genre in film, beating out the Western and the black comedy, non-fiction and documentary in video games are virtually non-existent. March of the Penguins has grossed worldwide over $127 million. Justin Bieber's Never Say Never, $99 million. And Fahrenheit 9/11 has grossed $222 million, beating out Harry Potter, The Notebook, and Dodgeball in its opening weekend. This is the thing from the movie. Nonfiction is significantly more popular in books, with studies showing that Americans read an almost equal amount of fiction to nonfiction. But it's not the case with video games. Well, at least not yet. There have been roughly 400 movies that are based on true events, or at least movies that say they are. This isn't nonfiction, but the movies do attempt to portray a version of the events that is in some way representative of the actual events. Whether or not they're accurate varies a lot. It's the thought that counts. Movies based on true events have elements of nonfiction. While often they are wildly embellished with drama and they condense characters for storytelling purposes, one could argue that they do tell a version of an event with as much variance of bias as a documentary on the same subject. I'm not saying they're documentaries, rather documentaries' distant cousins.
Twice removed.
With this, we can look at the current video game landscape and notice a gap when it comes to non-fiction, or at the very least, games based on true stories. The games that are based on true stories are the ones based on large historic events with lots of room for play, like World War II, and actually, yeah, just World War II. We don't often see the Wolf of Wall Street type stories, very small-scale stories focused on very specific events. In video games, we're given stories akin to Inglourious Basterds, historical fiction, not stories akin to Captain Phillips. True stories. Assassin's Creed tells a fictional story in a non-fictional world, and if you ignore all the silly Assassin Templar stuff, the games have been well received as an accurate depiction of their chosen time periods. Meaning that by simply walking around the world and exploring its characters, Assassin's Creed could become a piece of non-fiction, or at least a game that's based on true events. Air quotes. They're fun. But the genre isn't non-existent, it's just severely underserved. 2005's Under Siege is a first-person shooter that follows the lives of a Palestinian family during the Second Palestinian Uprising against Israeli occupation. The game has been heralded as a docu-game, as it is based on actual events documented by the UN. Age of Empires was a historical real-time strategy game whose campaign gave a very light history of its chosen time periods. According to one of the game's designers, Bruce Shelley, the game was primarily designed as entertainment, focusing on the human experience rather than an in-depth history lesson. They even used children's history books in order to not go into too much depth and bore people. Possibly the best example of a docu-game in its truest format is Fort McMoney. The game is closer to being an interactive documentary than an open-world video game, as it takes you through the oil industry in Fort McMurray, Canada. The game is built almost entirely out of live-action footage, making it the most real-looking game I've ever seen, because duh. Sorry, Call of Duty Advanced Warfare. Maybe you should have used a camera. It uses point-and-click controls reminiscent of Myst, Telltale's The Walking Dead, and with its live-action footage, Google Street View. The point of the game is to explore the town and its inhabitants to learn more about the oil industry in Canada. You can interview people with Mass Effect-style lines of dialogue, attend city council meetings, and learn more about the history of the town through newsreels. There's a dashboard with a map that aggregates all the information you've learned, holds polls for you and other players to vote on online, and tracks your progress through the game. It's real fun. While the game isn't nearly as engrossing as an Assassin's Creed title, I did find it very compelling after a while to learn more about a place I previously didn't know much about. A common argument against the docu-game is its interactivity. I mean, how can something be accurate if you can influence it? This argument assumes that there's only one type of non-fiction story that can be presented and that simple observation contains no bias, which isn't true. In the case of the Assassin's Creed argument, you would exist as an observer, like a camera. You'd take on the role of an undocumented person in a documented event. The argument doesn't take into account games like Under Siege or Fort McMoney, both of which present a real world for you to explore and learn about. Board Big Money doesn't pretend you're a character in the game, but rather an audience for a story. 2004's JFK Reloaded allowed you to play as Lee Harvey Oswald with the task of assassinating John F. Kennedy. And being interactive, the assassination could end differently than it was documented in real life. The creators of the game view the game as an extension of the treatment the event was already receiving by the media. No, it doesn't present the facts exactly how they happened, but that's not the sole purpose of the documentary genre. The game followed the same what-if, conspiracy theory type exploration that the media had been doing for years. They just presented it differently. With Minecraft, among others, being used in classrooms, video games and education are becoming increasingly popular. But until people start wanting more docu-games like they want documentary film and non-fiction literature, I guess we can just play this NES game about Operation Desert Storm starring George Bush Sr. fighting his way through Iraq. What do you guys think? Can video games be non-fiction, or does interactivity present too much of a bias? Let me know in the comments, and if you haven't already, be sure to click right on my face to subscribe, or at least think about it. Could Zelda be a survival horror game? Let's see what you guys thought. Ballbreaker comments saying that it's not a survival horror game, it's a grief game because it strips out all the parts that make it fun without adding anything scary. It just makes it incredibly difficult, which is a perfect comment for your username, by the way. And that what makes Zelda Zelda is all the power-ups and stuff that they cut out of the rules, and that we should play the game how it was meant to be played. Which is an interesting thing, because I wonder, maybe that could be how it was meant to be played. Who gets to decide how it was meant to be played? Why do the creators get to tell you how to play the game if you want to play the game in a different way? Obviously they own the idea, but does that really make them an authority on what is fun for you? Hi says that it's not a survival game because there isn't an unkillable enemy and that you can sort of overcome everything and it just happens to be difficult. I don't know that you need an unkillable enemy to be a survival game. For example, Don't Starve is a survival game that has enemies that you can overpower, but it still has survival elements. I don't know that you need an unkillable thing to make it a survival game. You just have to make it incredibly difficult and make it easier, or you have to make it harder to survive than it is in a regular game, if that makes sense. Tom Dabak comments saying that Majora's Mask is much scarier than Ocarina of Time. And I totally agree with you. In a traditional playthrough, Majora's Mask has way more scares in it. It's a much scarier game. And I guess if you played the Uber Challenge in Majora's Mask, if that's even possible, that would probably be even more of a horror game. Relo says that it's still not a horror game because horror is entirely contextual, and aside from the Shadow Temple, there really isn't any scary stuff in Ocarina of Time, which is a really good point, but I would argue that horror, I would think, is more subjective than necessarily contextual. I could find something a lot more horrific than you might, even if the context is there. So for example, if you see horror movies all the time because you love horror movies and you're not scared by jump scares, you might wear that as a badge of honor and you wouldn't experience the horror in the same way that I would. So if I'm playing Ocarina of Time and I'm horrified of dying, and that is my biggest fear, then that is horrific to me while it might not be to you. Killshot asks where I can find my Let's Plays. I actually used to do a channel called Gamezay and GamezaDaily. On GamezaDaily you can find my Let's Plays. I haven't posted there in like 5 months, but maybe if you guys want me to, I can start doing it again. Just let me know what you want. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the comments.